Your grandma didn't have heated seats. She had newspapers stuffed in her boots and a prayer. Winter in 1960s Canada wasn't something you survived with a remote starter and a Starbucks run. It was a full-contact sport played against nature itself. And Canadians, they got creative in ways that would make modern safety inspectors weep into their clipboards. So how did people actually make it through winters that regularly hit -40? When your car was basically a tin can on wheels and your house insulation was whatever you could shove in the walls. Keep watching, because some of these survival tactics are straight up medieval. Number 10. The block heater ritual. Picture this. It's February 1967 in Winnipeg. The temperature is -35 Celsius. That's -31 Fahrenheit for the Americans playing at home. Your car has been sitting outside all night because, surprise, most people didn't have garages, or if they did, they were detached and unheated. Basically just a shed where you stored your disappointment. Engine oil at that temperature has the consistency of peanut butter. Your battery? Dead. Not dying. Dead. So Canadians invented the block heater. This was a heating element you plugged into your engine block to keep the oil warm enough to actually move. Except you couldn't just plug it in. You needed an extension cord, a long one, running from your house to your driveway. Every single night, you'd trudge outside in the dark, uncoil a frozen extension cord that had turned into a garden hose made of spite, and plug in your car. Then you'd set an alarm for 6 a.m. to unplug it before you left. Why? Because if you forgot to unplug it and drove away, you'd rip the cord right out of the wall. Your neighbors would find it dangling there like some automotive crime scene. The entire neighborhood looked like a really depressing Christmas light display. Extension cords everywhere. Plugs froze into outlets. People tripped over them in the dark. It was chaos. But it worked. Without a block heater, your car wasn't starting until April. And nobody had time for that. Number 9. The polar vortex fashion statement. Forget Canada Goose jackets that cost more than rent. In the 60s and 70s, winter fashion had one rule: bulk. More bulk. Keep adding bulk until you couldn't fit through doorways. Men wore wool pants over thermal underwear, over regular underwear. Women wore skirts over pants because, heaven forbid, anyone see a woman in just pants. Kids were bundled so tight they couldn't lower their arms. Playground fights were just two puffy kids slowly rotating into each other. But here's the genius part. The parka. Not the sleek and fitted thing you see now. These were coats that went down to your knees and were lined with actual fur. Real fur from actual animals. Your grandfather's parka probably contained parts of something that used to live in the forest. The hood was so deep you could hide a sandwich in there for later. And everyone had a toque. That's a winter hat for the non-Canadians. Except these weren't cute little beanies. These were hand-knitted wool fortresses that your grandmother made while watching hockey night in Canada. They were itchy. They were ugly. They shed constantly, but they kept your brain from freezing. So you wore them and you didn't complain. Boats, rubber galoshes over your regular shoes. Or if you were really living, leather boots lined with felt inserts that got wet, froze solid overnight, and turned your feet into ice sculptures by morning. People walked around with frozen feet, so often it was just considered normal. Your circulation? That's a problem for future you. Number 8. The newspaper insulation method. Insulation in 1960s Canadian homes was a suggestion, not a requirement. Building codes were more like building hints, so Canadians improvised. And by improvised, I mean they stuffed newspapers into every gap they could find. Window frames leaked air like a screen door on a submarine. The solution? Roll up newspapers and jam them into the cracks. Walls had gaps between the studs. More newspapers. Basement cold. Lay newspapers on the floor, under the carpet. Some houses had so much newspaper in the walls, they were basically fire hazards wrapped in nostalgia. But it gets better. People would tape plastic sheeting over their windows. Entire windows. just sealed them off for winter. You'd buy these kits that came with plastic film and double-sided tape. You'd tape the plastic over the window frame, then use a hairdryer to shrink it tight. Suddenly your window was a drum, but it kept the cold out, sort of. And that was good enough. Some families took it even further. They'd close off entire rooms for winter, just abandon them. The spare bedroom, that's an icebox now. We'll see you in May. Heat was expensive. Oil furnaces cost money to run. So you heated the kitchen and the living room, and everywhere else could fend for itself. Kids would wake up in bedrooms so cold they could see their breath. Getting out from under the covers required the courage of an Arctic explorer. Some families used hot water bottles. Others just piled on every blanket they owned until the bed looked like a textile mountain. You didn't so much sleep as get buried alive in fabric. Number 7. The Automotive Survival Kit. Every Canadian car in the 70s came with a survival kit. Not from the dealer, from common sense. Because if your car broke down in the middle of nowhere in January, you weren't getting rescued, you were getting frozen. The kit included a wool blanket, candles, matches, a coffee can. Yes, a coffee can. Here's why. If you got stuck, you'd light the candle inside the coffee can. This tiny flame could keep the inside of your car just warm enough to not die. Not comfortable, not cozy, just not dead. That was the bar. People also carried a small shovel, not for digging out. For survival, you'd start the car, crack the window, and make sure the exhaust pipe wasn't blocked by snow. Because carbon monoxide doesn't care about your weekend plans. The shovel was to clear that pipe every 20 minutes while you waited for help that might not come. And snacks. High-calorie snacks. Chocolate bars. Crackers. Anything that wouldn't freeze solid and break your teeth. Because you might be in that car for hours. People got stranded between towns all the time. Roads would close without warning. Whiteout conditions could hit in minutes. Your car became your shelter, and you'd better hope you packed supplies. Some people carried sleeping bags, flares, extra gas in jerry cans, though that was technically illegal. Nobody cared. The RCMP weren't going to ticket you for trying not to freeze to death. Winter didn't take coffee breaks. And neither did you. The party line telephone system. This one's going to sound like science fiction to anyone under 40. In rural Canada during the 60s and 70s, most people didn't have private phone lines. They had party lines. Multiple families shared the same telephone line, which meant when you picked up the phone, you might hear your neighbor already talking. Now, imagine this during a winter storm. Phone lines would go down constantly. Ice storms were the worst. Ice would build up on the lines until they snapped under the weight. Entire regions would lose phone service for days. And this was before cell phones, before internet, before any way to communicate with the outside world except smoke signals and prayer. When the lines did work, the party line system meant you had to wait your turn. Someone's having a medical emergency? Too bad. Mrs. Henderson from down the road is talking about her nephew's new job. You'd pick up the phone, hear voices, and have to hang up and wait. Sometimes for an hour. But here's where Canadians got clever. The party line became a community alert system. If someone was in trouble, neighbors would spread the word through the line. Someone's car stuck in a ditch, word travels fast. Someone's furnace died. Everyone knows in 10 minutes. The system that seemed like an invasion of privacy became a lifeline. And if there was a real emergency, you'd just interrupt. Nobody got mad. Winter emergencies trumped telephone etiquette every time. The unspoken rule was simple. If you're interrupting, somebody better be dying or on fire, preferably both. Number 5. The root cellar revival. Modern people have fridges, freezers, climate-controlled food storage that keeps everything fresh. Your great-grandparents had a hole in the ground, and it worked better than you'd think. Root cellars were underground rooms designed to stay just above freezing all winter. Not warm, just not frozen. You'd store potatoes, carrots, turnips, Beets, anything that could handle being cold and slightly damp for 6 months. Apples would last until March. It was like nature's refrigerator, except it smelled like dirt and despair. But here's the thing. It worked. And when the power went out, which happened constantly during ice storms, the root cellar kept working. Your electric fridge, useless. Your deep freeze, a very expensive box. But that hole in the ground with the wooden door, still maintaining a perfect 2 degrees Celsius like nothing happened. People would also store canned goods down there. Tomatoes, pickles, jams, anything your grandmother spent all summer canning. The root cellar was the backup plan for the backup plan. Some families could go an entire winter without buying vegetables because of what they'd stored. Of course, going down to the root cellar in January was its own adventure. It built character, or trauma, probably both. Number 4. The Snowmobile Ambulance Network. In remote parts of Canada during the 60s and 70s, weeks, when the snow got bad enough, cars couldn't move. Plows couldn't keep up. Towns would get cut off from the rest of civilization. So how did people handle medical emergencies? Snowmobiles, but not the recreational toys you see now. These were industrial machines. Loud, heavy, utilitarian beasts that could pull a sled through 4 feet of snow. People would fashion sleds into makeshift stretchers. You'd bundle them up, strap them to a sled, and drive through the wilderness at 30 miles per hour, hoping they didn't bounce off. Volunteers would form snowmobile brigades. If someone called for help, multiple snowmobiles would head out, following each other in case one broke down, because in -30 weather, a broken snowmobile meant potential death for everyone. They'd drive for hours through blizzards to get people to hospitals in the nearest town. Some communities had designated meeting points. You'd snowmobile to the highway, where an ambulance would be waiting. The ambulance couldn't reach you, but you could reach it. The system was terrifying and crude and saved countless lives. Babies were born on snowmobile sleds. People having heart attacks were transported through forests in the dark. Broken bones, infections, emergencies of every kind were handled by regular people with snowmobiles and more courage than sense. Nobody got paid for this. It was just what you did, because next time it might be you on that sled. Number 3. The wood stove as central heating natural gas furnaces. That's adorable. In the 60s and 70s, huge portions of rural Canada heated their homes with wood, just wood. A big metal box in the middle of your house that burned logs and radiated heat in roughly one direction. If you weren't near the stove, you were cold. That was the system. Feeding the wood stove was a full-time job. You couldn't leave it unattended. If the fire went out overnight, the house would be freezing by morning. So someone had to wake up at 2 a.m. to add more logs. Every night. All winter, sleep schedules revolved around wood duty. And you needed a lot of wood, like a terrifying amount. Families would spend all summer and fall cutting, splitting, and stacking firewood. Cords upon cords of it. If you didn't have enough wood stacked by November, you were in serious trouble. You couldn't just order more. This wasn't Amazon Prime. This was survival. The wood stove would get so hot you couldn't touch it. Kids were constantly warned to stay away. Burns were common. Fires were a real danger. Chimneys would clog with creosote and need constant cleaning. If you didn't clean it, your chimney could catch fire. And a chimney fire could burn your entire house down. This wasn't a hobby. This was battle. But the upside? Your house smelled like wood smoke all winter. That cozy, nostalgic smell, and you could cook on top of the wood stove. Soup pots would simmer all day. You'd boil water for tea. Some families even baked bread on top of it. The wood stove wasn't just heating, it was the center of domestic life. Number 2. The outdoor hockey rink religion. If you grew up in Canada in the 60s or 70s, winter recreation meant one thing: hockey. Not at an arena. In your backyard, or the park, or the frozen lake. Anywhere flat that had ice. Fathers would spend weekends building backyard rinks. This wasn't casual. This was engineering. You'd build wooden boards around a section of your yard. Then you'd flood it with a garden hose. Layer after layer of water, each one freezing before you added the next. The ice would crack or be too rough to skate on. Too much snow and you'd have to shovel it all off before flooding again. The entire process took weeks. Every snowfall meant shoveling. Every warm day meant refloating. Some families had their rinks operational from December to March. 4 months of obsessive ice maintenance, but once it was ready, every kid in the neighborhood would show up. Games would last all day. You'd play until your feet went numb, until you couldn't feel your fingers, until your mom yelled that dinner was ready, and even then, you'd try to squeeze in one more goal. Nobody had fancy equipment. Wooden sticks that cost $3, skates that were too big or too small, padded with extra socks, goals made from scrap lumber or snow piles. Nets were a luxury. You just shot between two boots and argued whether it counted. This was how Canadians survived winter psychologically. You couldn't hide from it, so you embraced it. You turned the frozen hellscape into a playground. Every NHL player from that era learned hockey on rinks exactly like this. Cold, rough, perfect. Number 1. The community warming house strategy. Here's something that doesn't exist anymore but absolutely should. In small towns across Canada, communities would designate warming houses. These were buildings, usually near a skating rink or sledding hill, that stayed open all winter with heat and hot chocolate. You'd play outside until you couldn't feel your face. Where a volunteer, usually somebody's grandmother, had a wood stove cranking and hot chocolate waiting. You'd thaw out for 20 minutes, then head back into the cold. Repeat until dark. These warming houses were staffed by volunteers. People would sign up for shifts. Saturday afternoon, 1 to 5 p.m. Mrs. Patterson's in charge. She'd bring homemade cookies. Mr. Chen would work Sunday mornings and tell the same jokes every week. Nobody got paid. It was just community. The warming house was more than shelter. It was headquarters. Lost mitts ended up there. Kids who got separated from friends would wait there. If someone got hurt sledding, that's where you went first. It was medical station, lost and found and social club all in one. And the unspoken rule, you helped maintain it. Everyone chipped in. Someone would donate hot chocolate mix. Another family would bring firewood. Kids would take turns sweeping. It was socialism in the best possible way. Everyone contributed. Everyone benefited. By the 1980s, these started disappearing. Liability concerns, insurance costs. The same boring reasons everything good vanishes. Now kids play video games inside climate-controlled houses and wonder why winter feels so long. Their grandparents knew. You survive winter by diving straight into it. Together. So there you have it. 10 ways Canadians survived winters that would make modern people call in sick. No heated seats. No smartphone weather apps. Just newspapers, wood, wool, and a truly unhinged level of commitment to not letting the cold win. Your grandparents were tougher than you. And honestly, they earned it.